Hi, this is Pip. I'm here with my spoiler-free review of Blade Runner 2049. When I say spoiler-free, I genuinely mean it with this film. I went in knowing nothing at all about the plot or the setup or how it continues the original film, so it would be nice if you could too, so I'm going to completely preserve that and not give anything away, because this film makes some quite bold choices about how it continues the original story and how it handles the central characters. I'm saying this as a review, but I'm actually not sure how I felt about Blade Runner 2049. I kind of walked out of it feeling like I was enormously impressed by it, but wasn't sure whether it hung together or whether it quite explores its themes enough or whether it makes enough logical sense. But there are certain things about this film that I really did love, and actually having seen it yesterday, it's really stayed with me today in the things that I've thought about it. So, for example, Blade Runner 2049 really boldly and quite brilliantly continues the aesthetic of the first film. So it uses the score, but it builds upon it really interestingly. It depicts the same world, but it depicts it almost more convincingly in terms of the updating of the special effects, but also it shows you different areas and it gives them a more distinct aesthetic nature and in terms of what they mean. It's very serious about what it's getting at. In terms of its thematic undercurrents, it goes a bit further than the first film in terms of its exploration of the synthetic nature of man, or the synthetic nature of pleasure and what that means. And it features some really interesting performances and some really amazing imagery. The fundamental story, so I won't give anything away, but is about another Blade Runner played by Ryan Gosling, who is charged with retiring old replicants, just like Harrison Ford's character in the first film. And it is a sci-fi futuristic noir, so it follows that kind of story outline of the first film. It has the creator of the replicants as a central character, so it follows that from the first film as well. In this film, played with mixed results by Jared Leto. But it's more expansive. It goes for a kind of world view, and it tells a story which tries to take in a lot more about the world it's set in, rather than the narrow focus of the first film. There are a couple of sequences within the film that are really dazzling and I thought were really extraordinary. So again, I won't spoil any of it for you, in terms of the plot or what happens. But the opening couple of minutes of the film just depict Ryan Gosling's character asleep in his hover car as he flies over vast fields of things which exist in this futuristic landscape. So it's whole fields which have been given over to kind of mechanized farming, or vast plains which are filled with solar panels. And the kind of the somber sort of doom-laden feeling of that, that he's asleep and that he's indifferent to it as he goes, very much an homage to 2001, I think, in the sequence where they're indifferent to flying over the moon, has a real power to it. It's really interesting, and the visuals have a kind of emotional undercurrent. And there's a sequence in the middle which is a sort of a love scene where they play with Gosling's holographic girlfriend character, sort of in a weird kind of dual way of her being more solid, but the way that's handled visually, so you have two women almost literally mixing together, you can't tell which actress you're looking at or how that works, is really unsettling and really fascinating to watch, and it really plays with that idea of the kind of the commodification of pleasure and what you see in that, and that echoes really interestingly later in the film when Gosling is confronted with a giant hologram naked woman who's bigger than him, who's enticing him, but he doesn't know how he feels about it anymore. So it has sequences like that. There's a reappearance of a character from the original film in a really interesting and bold way that really made me sit up, and it crackles with a kind of a daring that that I was really pleased to see. It recreates the test sequences from the original film, where in the original he had to ask lots of questions, but in this one it's this kind of aggressive asking of Gosling's character, where he has to call response certain words, and it really makes you think about how, actually, if you were in that situation, about how much you could remain unemotional if you were faced with it. All those sequences are really interesting, and they have a bold kind of emotionality to the imagery. So the bits that are set in LA still depict the massive LA with its with its advertising and this idea of the world just building up. But we also get sequences in Las Vegas, which are this whole washed out different color palette and this kind of Ozymandias theme of Gosling walking under giant statues and those kind of things. all of that is really interesting. And it's great to see Ford back. He gets to do some interesting stuff. He's kind of grizzled and haggard, and they give him some action sequences which are a bit irrelevant, really. But it's just nice to see him, and you can sort of believe that he is the Deckard from the original film, and what they do with him is quite intriguing. And Gosling, who I'm very love-hate around, is well cast, and his character is really interesting, and he makes a good show of it, and he manages what's quite a delicate balance. So all that stuff, the aesthetics, the doom-laden nature, the expressions of the theme is all really interesting. As I watched it, I felt that there's a real drift in logic. Certainly for the first third, I was completely engrossed. I loved the aesthetic, I loved the thematic exploration, I loved the whole feel of it, and the sort of the dark tone of the performances. As it goes, it makes slightly odd leaps in logic, and it presumes that certain things are definitely true in terms of the plotting, whereas we haven't really shown that they are true, and it builds up to a resolution, which is a kind of really generic, not very interesting action sequence, followed by a sort of emotional conclusion that hasn't really been earned. So it has a kind of drift, and it lacks for me that sense of, I like the original film, and it's not one of my favourite films of all time, but it does have, in the original sequence, the original film in the last 20 minutes has that great bit where it climaxes after all of the sort of dark noir stuff that's come before, when Batty chases Deckard through the dilapidated building, and they move up the levels through all the dummies, and they end up in the rain. It has that wonderful symbolism in the original film of Deckard seeming like someone who's running away from something which is more vital and more alive than he is. Batty's such a fascinating character, and that whole bit in the original where he leans out of the window to feel the rain before he runs back in again, and those images of him shirtless padding through the dark corridors are really powerful, I think, in the original. It starts to acquire an epic and interesting weight before that famous final monologue. And the new one lacks that, really. It never feels like it coheres into something which truly lives for itself. In some bits, for example, it takes, say, the water waves lighting aesthetic from the first film, and it takes them to such a big degree in the new one that it feels slightly like it's just over-egging itself. And the character that Jared Leto plays is essentially the same character that Anthony Hopkins is playing in Westworld, but Leto just doesn't have the nuance or the boldness as an actor to make that character interesting. So where Hopkins, say in Westworld, is able to suggest regret or pride or sadness, Leto essentially comes off as quite a sort of a monologuing villain. And he's become quite an irritating actor, I think, as he's gotten older, and the sort of the methody stuff that he goes for. But not everyone seems to feel this way. Many people seem to really love it. Some people seem to think it betters the first film. I certainly don't think that's the case, but it certainly equals it. But you can never get around the fact that the first film is so influential in terms of its look. Everything after Blade Runner looks like Blade Runner in terms of that future aesthetic. So this one is worth seeing, and it has really stayed with me, and I'm quite keen to see it again and think about it. But you can't get around the fact that the plotting does drift off, and the logic of what you're seeing starts to sort of unwind as it goes, so it doesn't quite prop up its own thematic weight. But it is fascinating, and it's great to see a massive budget, essentially an art movie. It isn't going to do Star Wars box office, but then there's no reason why it should, and it is made for an adult market, and maybe people who are interested in seeing the first movie and seeing that kind of that exploration of the themes rather than something which is is out to cater to the blockbuster crowd. So it's a fascinating film. Whether it's entirely successful, I'm not sure, but the chances of getting a decent sequel to Blade Runner were surely next to none. So the fact that they've got artists who are really interested in putting it together and trying to make something interesting, and that they have had the nerve to go with that, is really to be admired. And Denis Villeneuve seems to me to have made consistently films which are slightly overrated, but are very well directed. So Sicario, which was very, very tense, it maybe doesn't add up to much, or Arrivals, that didn't really work, but for me, it has interesting constituent parts, or films like Prisoners, or that thing he made with Jake Gyllenhaal where he played twins, all films which are fascinating to watch but don't quite come together. But nevertheless, this is probably his best work, and it's supremely interesting. And I'd be fascinated to see him make a Bond movie if he ends up doing that, as seems to be the rumour. So Blade Runner 2049 is absolutely worth seeing, and do see it on the big screen. It's a real visual feast, and the visuals have a real impact and an emotional thematic weight as well, which you don't get in much mainstream cinema. So I didn't think as much of it as some people seem to, but maybe I'd slightly misjudged it. If the plotting doesn't quite support its themes, nevertheless, what is there is is kind of amazing in parts. So it's a must see. You know, if you like cinema, you must give it a go. So I thoroughly recommend it.